Last unit, we looked at how sociologists study social problems. This was an overview to help us prepare to study specific social problems in the United States. Starting with this unit, we're going to look at some of those particular social problems, and we're going to start with problems of poverty and inequality. Let's begin with some basic definitions. The economy refers to a system, usually a national system, in which goods and services are produced, distributed, and consumed. In a capitalist system, goods and services are produced and distributed privately through the market. In a socialist system, those goods and services are produced and distributed publicly through the state. Now, as Heiner points out in your textbook, there really are no purely socialist and capitalist countries. It's better to think of countries as falling somewhere along a continuum between these two extremes. The United States falls closer to the capitalist extreme than most countries. This means that compared to countries like France, we have a much less extensive social welfare system and less tolerance for big government. Heiner places many Western European countries somewhere in the middle of the continuum, referring to these countries as having a system of democratic socialism. Heiner places both the Democratic and Republican parties in the United States in between democratic socialism and pure capitalism, with Democrats closer to the democratic socialism ideal and Republicans closer to pure capitalism. Now, as we can see, both Democrats and Republicans are on the right-hand side of the socialist-capitalist continuum, meaning that they're more alike than different in terms of economic philosophy. This is important given recent discussions and concerns that the United States is becoming socialist. Even considering our recent healthcare reform bill, the United States is still one of the most capitalist countries in the world. Given its extreme form of capitalism and its minimal social safety net, the United States is characterized by considerable inequality. To measure that inequality, sociologists use what's called the Gini index. A Gini index of 0 would indicate that everyone has the same exact income. A Gini index of 1 indicates the most extreme form of inequality. Now, throughout U.S. history, the Gini index for the United States has risen and fallen. But over the past 30 years, it's been rising steadily. In 2005, the Gini index for the United States was 0.469, which put the U.S. on par with Russia and China in terms of inequality. Heiner attributes this rising inequality to a philosophy first promoted under the administration of President Ronald Reagan and thereafter by just about every other presidential administration, and that philosophy is known as trickle-down economics. And the idea is that if you help the rich get richer by limiting government regulations or lowering taxes for the rich will spend more money and invest more money, and that wealth will trickle down to other workers. The rich have indeed gotten richer in the United States. In 1970, the average CEO made 79 times more than the average worker. By 2004, they were making 431 times more than the average worker. But their wealth has failed to trickle down to others. Wealth has been created, but not distributed equally. For class, you watched a PBS segment about income inequality in America. Now, that segment was produced in 2007, so the economy that they're referring to in this segment is the pre-recession economy. That economy was fairly strong. Productivity was high, unemployment was quite low. But as both David Johnston and Beth Schulman point out in that video, the gains of that economy were not distributed equally. Johnston noted that the 300,000 wealthiest Americans, that's 1/10 of 1% of all Americans, were earning the same amount as the bottom 50% of all Americans. Schulman, in turn, points out that 1 in 4 Americans earns less than $9 an hour, and they have no sick leave, no health care plan, and no pension. These Americans may have held jobs, but they didn't earn enough money to pay the bills, care for sick children, or take a summer vacation. Such Americans would fare slightly better in France, where the government mandates that employers provide 31 days of leave for vacation time. They would also fare slightly better in Japan, where the government mandates 10 vacation days. In the United States, workers are entitled to zero vacation days. We're the richest country in the world, explains Schulman, but we can't provide a decent life. Even more striking than the income gap is the gap in wealth in this country. Now, when we talk about wealth, we're referring to assets, not wages and salaries. We're talking about things like stocks, property, savings. Wealth matters for a lot of reasons. With wealth, you can pass down money to your children after your death. With wealth, you can pay for your children to go to college, put a down payment on a house, withstand a financial emergency. In 1976, the top 1% of families in the United States held 19% of the country's wealth. In 2000, they held 40% of the country's wealth. To illustrate the kind of wealth inequality, I asked you to watch a YouTube video called The BBs of Wealth. And this video begins with a simple question. What does wealth inequality sound like? To put a sound to the statistics, they dropped BB pellets, each representing $500, into a metal soup pot. Now, the average wealth of the bottom 50 million households, roughly half the U.S. population, was $5,000 at the time the video was made. And this figure represented 10 BBs, which made a weak clank in the pot. The average wealth of the top 1% of households was $10 million. That's the average wealth. The sound of thousands of BBs falling in the pot was deafening, and the point, of course, was to suggest how wide the gap is and how excessive the wealth of that top 1% is. So if the economy was failing during the boom years of the 1990s, what's been happening since the Great Recession? A recent Washington Post article calls the aughts a lost decade for American workers. The median income fell, net job creation fell to zero, and housing and pension values plummeted. The capitalist system has always been prone to crisis. This was a major insight made by Karl Marx back in the 1800s. There are highs, there are lows, and everything in between. But what makes the current downturn so troublesome is that it's coming at the end of a boom that offered very little to workers. What about the wealthy? How have they fared in the recession? Without question, many wealthy people have cut back. But cutting back is quite different than going broke. As well, there's evidence to suggest that many of the wealthiest Americans have actually done quite well in the recession. According to Forbes, the net worth of the 400 wealthiest Americans actually grew in 2008 by $30 billion. Collectively, America's 400 wealthiest individuals are worth some $1.57 trillion. That's enough money to endow every public university in America so that students could go to college for free. Not for a year, forever.